A Creeping, Crawling Thing. Written by Dick Hine. Read for you by Edward E. French. Monsieur Briot arrived in Paris on the fast evening train from Lyon. He was a man of middle height, wearing a stylish light brown overcoat, a black derby hat, and a gray traveling suit. His thin face was tanned, and he had a small brownish mustache. His only baggage was a small handbag which contained nothing but 4 objects: a small live lizard about 4 inches long, a spool of white silk thread, a silver teaspoon, and a tiny bottle of black liquid. Monsieur Briot took a taxicab from the station, directing the driver to an address in the Rue des Pyrénées. As he sat back comfortably, the handbag at his feet, there was an expression of complete satisfaction in the clear blue eyes under the high, wide forehead, and a look of pleasant anticipation on his rather inscrutable features. Nobody in all the world could have guessed what Briot was up to now. Perhaps several gentlemen in blue clothes would have been interested, had they known. But there was one man in Paris expecting him, Pierre Laristou. After half an hour's driving, the taxicab stopped before the house in the Rue des Pyrénées. Soon Monsieur Briot was seated in a brilliantly lighted and elegantly furnished room, engaged in conversation with the man he had come to visit. The two faced each other across a fine polished table, in the middle of which rested the handbag. Pierre Laristou was about 50, tall, thin, and aristocratic-looking. His well-kept black clothes, his handsome features, his attentive manner would have deceived anyone who did not know that he was a criminal of the first order. To the world he was a gentleman of means. In reality, he was a man of decidedly questionable ways. "I must ask you to explain just exactly what you want," Briot was saying. "It is simple enough," said the suave and polite Laristou. "I want to get a certain paper from the hands of the Marquis d'Onon. The Marquis carries this paper in a belt around his waist. He is never without the belt, but he is a cautious man. Moreover, he must not know that I am after the paper at this particular time. The people for whom I am operating do not want him to become over-suspicious. I was informed that you have a method of, you might say, removal of personal factor that never fails. If you can guarantee to get this paper for me, I am prepared to pay you the price mentioned in my letter. Can you do it?" "I am afraid not, without the removal of the personal factor," said Briot. "Fortunately, I came ready to do that. But I must know some more about this Donneau. Where does he live?" "At the Louis Court, Boulevard Arago. His house is surrounded by large grounds. The bedroom is known to me. You can gain access to that easily enough by climbing up the vines on the side of the house and reaching the balcony and his window." "And will you accompany me to the house and enter the bedroom?" "I will. But tell me your method." "It is quite simple. I have here in this handbag a certain lizard, a rare form of the Lacertilia and non-poisonous. I can make it poisonous for a definite length of time. It then bites once, and the effect is invariably fatal. But the subject must be alive. It never bites a dead person." "How do you protect yourself?" I have learned how to handle him. I say him now, for I call the lizard Oscar. I never operate with Oscar. He does his little work entirely by himself. I tie a thread around the middle of the body and let him go where he pleases. Then I retrieve by means of the thread. The bite, how is it made poisonous? I give him a few drops of a mixture of arsenic, aconite, and digitalis in a base solution of cyanic acid. The formula was accidentally discovered by an Italian physician experimenting with the reptilian heart. He himself was bitten by a harmless lizard and nearly died of blood poisoning. The combination must set up some sort of reaction in the system. It makes Oscar at once vicious, aggressive, and venomous. He has learned to love his medicine. So far, I see the road clear. But how long will this induced state last? About 2 hours. I generally load Oscar at home. 2 hours suffice in most cases for my little expeditions. Will you consent to operate tonight? It is only 10 o'clock. We can leave about 1 in my machine and be back by 3 in the morning. I will gladly go tonight. Do you want to see Oscar? Briot opened the handbag, thrust in his hand, and took out the lizard. The creature crawled sluggishly over the polished table. He was full of a dull green color, with a suggestion of scaliness. His tail was sharp and repulsive. The bulging eyes, covered with winking lids, roamed furtively over the men. The jaws were long, the legs bold and clumsy. The underbelly gasped and pulsated with the breathing and circulation. L'Aristou shuddered at the deviltry of Briot. Shortly before 1 o'clock, Briot prepared to fix Oscar for his night's work. He took out of the handbag the liquid, teaspoon, and white silk thread. The lizard crawled expectantly to before his master, seeming to know that his craved potion was about to be administered. Briot poured a few drops of the black liquid into the spoon. The reptile opened his jaws wide and raised his head. The stuff was poured easily into the throat. This done, Briot hurriedly tied the thread around the body between the sets of legs. Then he placed his lizard and spoon and bottle back in the bag, letting the thread come out through a little slot in the fastenings and holding the spool in his hand.
All I have to do now, he explained, is to carry the spool and the handbag's handle in the same hand. When I wish Oscar to operate, I merely open the case, pull him out, and pay off the thread from the spool.
L'Aristou's fine automobile whirred across Paris. The Pont de Bercy was crossed, and the machine went down the Boulevard de la Guerre and over into the Boulevard Ego. Finally, a great estate with extensive front grounds loomed up to the left. When the car stopped 2 blocks beyond the driveway, L'Aristou instructed his chauffeur to wait, and the men got out. They were soon climbing over a low wall and walking toward the big house. The grassy lawn was thick with trees. L'Aristou seemed to know his way perfectly. He led Briot to a curving walk that went toward the rear of the grounds. Presently, they turned and went to the side of the house. By the light of the moon, they saw the vine-covered wall that rose 20 feet to a small balcony, above which gleamed the reflecting panes of large windows. "The bedroom is behind those windows," whispered L'Aristou. "I have climbed to the balcony before, and it can be done without much noise. I'll go first. Then I can assist you." But a minute sufficed for him to reach the balcony. Briot followed easily enough, giving his hand to his companion, who pulled him safely up. They stood still for several minutes to make certain they had not been heard. The room appeared dark within. L'Aristou softly tried one of the glass window doors. It moved easily. He turned his flashlight into the room. A bar of light showed the bed, in which was the form of a sleeping man lying on his side. The dark hair and black mustache were plainly visible. "He is a sound sleeper," said Ristou softly into Briot's ear. "I have heard he rarely wakes before 9 in the morning. I'll keep the light on until Oscar is released and reaches the bed." They stepped inside, and Briot opened his handbag and took out the lizard. The moonlight streaming in through the window reflected from the greenish skin, and the reptile assumed a strange glow as he wriggled in his master's hand. When placed upon the floor, Oscar hesitated not a second, but began to crawl swiftly across the floor toward the bed. The flashlight followed him. The bed was reached, and the lizard caught the covering near the floor with his jaws and pulled his clumsy legs up to grasp the cloth. When Briot saw that Oscar was mounting successfully, he had L'Aristou shut off the light. Then he stood silently in the darkness, Only the trembling thread in his hand and the turning of the spool indicated the progress of the destroying reptile. About 15 minutes passed. L'Aristou's breathing became audible with suspense and excitement. "Let us retrieve and see what he has done," he suggested to Briot.
"No, let's don't pull Oscar out yet. Doubtless he has done his work, and the Marquis has been several minutes dead. But we must make sure. Show your light."
The light flashed. On the white mound of the man's body, the lizard stood at rest, sending out and pulling in his little tongue with rapid movements.
"I think we can go to the bed now,"
said Monsieur Briot.
"Perhaps we can pull down the shades and turn on the lights."
L'Aristou closed the window doors behind them, drew the shades, and felt for the switch. After a minute he flashed on the electric lights. The room was elegant. High walls and ceiling were wonderfully finished in cream white. The floor was carpeted with soft plush. The furniture shone with a fine mahogany finish, and the bed was a marvel of beauty. Under the gorgeous coverings, the form of the Marquis d'Ornans lay still. Briot carefully pulled off his lizard. Oscar suffered himself to be hauled in and returned to the handbag. Briot stood then with the rewound thread and the bag's handle in the same hand.
"It seems that all is well so far," said L'Aristou.
"Let us examine the body." The man's back was toward them, one shoulder mounting high under the coverings. He was handsome, with a fine head of hair and distinguished mustache and healthy pink skin. L'Aristou touched the cheek. He drew his hand away quickly, as if shocked by the marble coldness. A look of perplexity spread over his face. Briot boldly stripped off the bedclothes. The Marquis d'Ornans was made of wax. His face, perfectly reproduced, had momentarily fooled L'Aristou, but now all was clear. The figure was clad in silk pajamas and looked very natural. "The devil!" whispered L'Aristou. "Now we're in for it. Let us replace the bedclothes and retreat at once, leaving everything just as we found it. I might have known that Marquis would have made some arrangements to protect his slumber. I'll bet now that he doesn't sleep in this house at all."
"And Oscar has not yet bitten anyone," said Briot. "He still holds the venom in his stomach."
They arranged the bed and wax figure as it had been before and went softly to the window. Briot turned off the lights and let up the shade. When he tried to open the window, it refused to move. L'Aristou also tried vainly to open it, but try as they might, they could not move the doors. Somehow the catches had become tight, and nothing could release them. Briot walked in the darkness to a door that apparently was a hall door. It was locked. By the window the men stood, caught in the room with no way of escaping. To break the glass window doors would be certain to bring discovery. To force the door would let the whole household down on them. There was at the present no evident way of getting out. Suddenly L'Aristou's eye caught a yellow streak on the floor against the wall. He turned his flashlight on it. A door showed, and he knew that a light was on in the next room. Both men stepped over to the door and listened. All was silent. For 20 minutes they strained their ears in the darkness without hearing anything. The keyhole showed nothing but a bare white wall opposite the eye. Finally, it occurred to Briot to do something desperate.
"I know a way," he said to L'Aristou. "You know Oscar is not yet bitten and still holds his poison. Evidently someone is asleep in that room with the light on. I think I can let Oscar into the room through the crack where the light shows. The door stands high enough from the floor. Oscar will kill the person, and we can then cut the lock out of the door and see if we can find a way of escape through the windows in there."
"Good," said L'Aristou. "It is our only chance to get out tonight." Briot opened up the handbag in the gleam of the flashlight and took out his lizard. He handled the reptile carefully and put him on the floor by the yellow bar. The creature was restless and showed pleasure when he saw the light. He raced toward it, spinning the spool in Briot's hand, crawled quickly under the door, and was gone. The thread went out rapidly. 3 minutes passed, and it still trembled and came off the spool. However, it soon became lax and moved no more. For half an hour the men stood in the darkness, breathlessly waiting for something to take place. They could not be sure what. Finally, Briot pulled in the thread. It came easily, and at the end there was no lizard.
"Oscar must have broken his thread," said Briot. "I think we had best proceed with cutting out the lock now. All must be over in the room."
All was over in the next room, but just beginning in this one, for just as Le Restou was feeling for his pocket-knife, a lock clicked in the darkness. Both men turned and perceived by the beam of the flashlight that the door to the hall was opening rapidly. A white hand felt along the wall, and a switch was pressed. A flood of light swept into the room. The men, for a moment blinded, were dumbfounded by what they saw. A woman had entered from the hall and closed the door behind her. She was middle-aged and beautiful. Her body, clad in nightdress, was also wrapped in a purple dressing gown belted with a jeweled girdle. Her left hand was held straight out from her shoulder, and from a 3-foot thread wound about her fingers, Oscar dangled, wriggling frantically. Her right hand held a silver-finished automatic pistol, which was pointed at the breasts of Briot and Le Restou. The two surprised men lost no time in raising their hands above their heads, Briot dropping his spool of thread and handbag upon the floor. The spool rolled under a table. There the trio stood for a minute before anyone spoke. Briot's black derby and brown overcoat looked strangely out of place. The elegant Le Restou, with handsome face and neater clothes, harmonized more closely with the luxury of the room and the woman outlined in purple against the cream-white door.
"Marie Frizzell!" gasped Le Restou at last. "Pierre Le Restou," said the woman in a clear, rich voice. "I am no longer Marie Frizzell of the winding stairs. That I may have been, but I am now the Marquise d'Arnaud. I need not ask you what you are doing in my house. I was reading in bed when this reptile came to do his work. Do you take me for a fool? A green lizard with a string to it climbing up a bed in the dead of night can mean only one thing: an attempt to murder someone. But, thanks to heaven, I saw it in time. Also, let me be thankful that my husband is away, that he protects himself with a false bedroom, a wax likeness, and automatic locking devices on the windows. Without his foresight, I should not now have the good fortune to see you a prisoner in my hands. Well, you shall pay. Who is this man with you?"
"That is no business of yours," said Le Restou, already white with fear, and the recollection of past things, perhaps unspeakable. The woman looked directly at Briot. "I do not know you, nor anything about you. Whatever you may have done, or were preparing to do, was but at the instigation of this fiend, who is about to die. But you are a burglar in my house, and as such you must be arrested. Jean!" The door opened, and a heavy-set young serving man appeared. "Take this man and deliver him to the nearest police officers. Tell them that he was caught prowling in my house, and that I shall see the local commissaire tomorrow. Return here afterward." The Marquise d'Arnaud faced Le Restou with triumph on her pretty features, satisfaction in her rich dark eyes of flame. "Surely you do not intend to kill me," stammered Le Restou. "Why should you not die? Have I not 1,000 just reasons for sending you to hell? But listen, my machine and chauffeur are only 2 blocks away. Allow me to go home. I will pay you money. I will leave France." "Thanks for the information. I am going to Deauville and shall need an extra limousine for my servants. As for your chauffeur, he'll be none the worse when he awakes on the other side of Paris with a lump on his head. No, Pierre Le Restou, I cannot afford to let you go. Jean will be back in a few minutes. Jean returned. Take this one and tie him hand and foot, said the Marquise d'Ono. Jean obeyed his orders swiftly and expertly, and Le Restou was shortly lying on his back on the floor. The woman tied one end of the thread to a paperweight and anchored Oscar on the rug with enough slack thread for him to reach Le Restou. Then she and Jean left the room. When they came in 20 minutes later, Oscar was sleeping soundly on Le Restou's lifeless cheek. Jean smashed the lizard's head with a paperweight and put him and the spool of thread in the handbag. By the way, Jean, throw that handbag also into the river, said the Marquise d'Ono as she turned and left the room. Monsieur Briot, temporarily detained in Paris on a little charge of burglary, speculates as to what sort of paper the Marquis d'Ono carries in a belt around his waist. And he thinks very tenderly of his poor, dear little Oscar, and wonders whatever became of him. The end. A Creeping, Crawling Thing was written by Dick Hine, told to you by Edward E. French. This recording of A Creeping, Crawling Thing is copyright 2024 by Edward E. French. All rights strictly reserved. Inquiries should be addressed to email edwardfrench06@hotmail.com. And subscribe if you haven't already to the Fiction Fantastique channel, www.youtube.com/French Edward 06. Good night.